Welcome into the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee, joined by Blake Lovell as usual. Blake, an interesting weekend in Southeastern Conference basketball. We got a little more clarity towards the NCAA tournament picture, at least as it stands at this point. Things can change, but a very interesting weekend. It's good to be back amidst these snowy, icy conditions in the Nashville area. So my kids are excited about that. My dog is as well. But Blake, what stood out to you in this SEC basketball weekend that we have just finished?
Yeah, on the snow front, I feel like a lot of the Southeast, a lot of the teams probably well represented in the snowy parts here. I know Arkansas fans have been all over Twitter talking about what they're getting. We know Texas, what all that. So should be interesting to see kind of what it looks like there for the snow aspect. But on the basketball court, like you said, I thought it was a weekend where the teams that needed to win won, and that was good for the league. It was good for those teams, not necessarily, for the teams that they beat, but the teams that needed to win games. And I think we identified there were three teams that really needed to get wins. That was Arkansas, LSU, and Ole Miss, and all three of them got the wins they needed. Now, the Arkansas and LSU one's a little bit bigger than the Ole Miss one, but at the end of the day, Ole Miss getting a little bit closer now. Arkansas and LSU, I don't want to say that they are just 100% complete locks at this point because, as we always say, Chris, teams can lose out, and that can change how you look coming NCAA tournament time. But for now, those two teams, both at 8-4 in the conference, and got pretty much, arguably their best wins of the season for sure. So good weekend for the Hogs, the Tigers, and the Rebels.
Well, there are 6 teams that I believe are in at this point, and I think at this point, hard to see any of those 6, if the field were selected today, falling below an 8 or a 9 seed. And maybe they're all 7 or higher. I don't know. But I look at it, and these are 6 teams that right now are not just in, but they're not even bubble in.
Yeah, I think that the LSU one, I thought really, pushed them forward significantly because, as we said before, they were the one we were probably most concerned about, maybe, I think, overall. But, I think now that you look at them beating a team like Tennessee, it's a situation where, okay, they beat Tennessee. That's a huge win for them. And then for Arkansas, we just said it. I mean, they've got to beat one of these good teams eventually, and I feel like that they were able to do that. Finally, they get that signature win they've been needing against Missouri, and now I think Arkansas is set up in pretty good shape. So I'm with you. I think 6 teams solidly in the field right now, including Alabama, who put up quite a performance against Georgia, to say the least.
Let's start with LSU, and before we get into LSU's win over Tennessee, one thing that we were worried about was Darius Days having that injury a couple of weekends ago. Well, turns out he misses just one game, and he's back and playing exceptionally well. He's now got the top offensive rating in the league, according to Sports Reference at least. But that was a little bit of a bullet that the Tigers dodged getting him back, and he was huge in that Tennessee game for them. Maybe not huge, but good, solid as he always is. 14 points. He's got 5 rebounds in that one, 6 of 10 from the field. But you've heard commentators in the league talk about what he means to that team. And it's not just that end, but it's the defensive end too, Blake.
Yeah, he's a really good player. I mean, I think that that's something where we looked at this group that was going to be coming back for them, and I almost felt like at times we left him out of that conversation because we were probably so focused on Trendon Watford and Javonte Smart, and knowing that they had Cam Thomas coming in. I think maybe we said, all right, Darius Days maybe is the 4th guy in that group. But in terms of importance, like you said it, I mean, it's clear this guy he's so important to what they do. And, if they're going to play better defense, they need him on the floor. If they want to be good on offense, they need him on the floor. And so he's a big addition for them to have back and just to get that win the way they got it. And look, here's the thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about Tennessee in a second, but Tennessee's offense is an absolute struggle. But I think for LSU to hold someone to 65 points, I don't care who you're playing. That gives you a little bit of confidence if you're LSU because they have not been good on the defensive end, as we've said. But Darius Days, coming back in, you talked about the statistics, the numbers with him. He's a game changer, and I think just having him on the floor adds such a different dynamic for this LSU team, and paid off in this game. By holding Tennessee to 65, and it's not often you see LSU hold a team to 65 points because they can score, but they give up a lot too. But I thought this was the exact type of performance LSU needed.
Yeah, well, the Tigers just build in so much margin of error because I feel like every night Cameron Thomas gives him 20 plus. It's not always efficient, but it's always there. Javante Smart, I think, has been pouring into 20-point games with regularity. You've got Trenton Watford has had some big scoring games. They just got so many guys that can put the ball in the bucket, probably more than anybody in the league if you want to go 4 or 5 deep. And when you start at that point, your defense can be shaky and you can still win some games.
Yeah, I think that's how we've kind of classified them probably all season. I would guess at this point, isn't it? Like just you know what you're getting from them on offense, and at times they're so good on that side that man, they can they may give up 85, but they'll probably find a way to score 87. And I think that's just kind of the team that they are, and really it feels like they've been that way a bit over the past several years. Their defense, as we've said, if you just look at the raw numbers, the defense probably is not to the level that Will Wade would want it to be to since he's been there. But they've still won games, and it's really just because they can really be very dominant on offense at times. And this group's no different because, they've got, arguably they've got four NBA players in their starting five, probably. Cam Thomas, Watford, Smart, Darius Days, they've got guys who are going to play at the next level, and it's because mostly of their ability on offense just to score the way that they can. So, this team's got a different gear. They just, I think, have struggled to find it sometimes on defense.
We have sort of bemoaned the clarity and consistency that we get out of the league because just when one team plays well for a couple of games, it kind of lays a stinker. And Tennessee's been a team we've talked about a little bit in that regard. I don't know. Maybe we make too much of it because these are good teams, right? I mean, you've got 6 teams in the league right now, NCAA tournament teams. You've got some other teams, Ole Miss that we'll get to the Rebels in a while, but maybe knocking at the door with a couple more wins. You've got a few NIT type teams in here too. I mean, the league other than Vanderbilt and Texas A&M and maybe Georgia, which is kind of in between the pack and where those two teams are, pretty competitive on a lot of nights. Are we making too much of the inability of say, a Tennessee, or at times we picked on Florida to emerge just because there are so many pretty good teams in this league?
Let me ask you this, because you got to see, you watched Tennessee LSU game, and you've seen Tennessee play a lot this season, and I'm curious to see when you watch Tennessee play offense, what do you feel like is the one thing that just completely stands out to you when they're struggling? Let's just say when they're struggling, because when they're good, I mean, we've said it before, we feel like when they're good, we want to say that Jaden Springer is kind of that catalyst for what they do on offense. If he's really good, Tennessee offense is probably going to be okay. But even when he is really good sometimes, they don't get a lot elsewhere. And I feel like when you watch them play, that's one of the things that stands out to me is when they're struggling. I don't know what it is, but it almost, you look out there and you say, I don't know that there are a lot of guys in that lineup at times that look like that they exactly know what to do on offense sometimes. So for me, that's the biggest thing that stands out with them.
Well, I look at some of the better Tennessee teams that we've seen the last couple of decades, and I'm sitting here thinking, if you could add one player from the past to this team, I'm probably picking Chris Lofton, right? Because he could always hit a three. He could hit one from 28 with the guy in his face. And it just seems like they have a lot of nights like they had Saturday where they go 8 of 27 from three. And to me, I'm not saying Tennessee's a bad offensive team, right? Or none of those kids can shoot, but some of the better teams have had that elite shooter, and I just don't think they've got that.
I think, and look, a lot of people keep pointing to 2 guys in particular, and it's the 2 guys we talked about the most coming into the season, and that was Zeke Pons and John Fulkerson. And I think in any game you play, if you're Tennessee, and you get 7 combined points from those 2, you're probably not going to win. I just feel like that's probably the case to where we know, those 2 guys, their specialty, for the most part, we knew the season was going to be on defense, but I think they need more from those 2 in terms of, on both sides of the court at times. But really, like I said, I think they're going to struggle to win games where those 2 combine for 7 points. And, I don't know what that is. Those are 2 seniors and 2 guys that, again, have kind of built their success on their defense. But I just feel like they've got to have more from those two, especially in that particular area. And I'm sure there are other areas. If you ask Rick Barnes, he's probably saying, yeah, they can probably improve their game in other areas too. But I just feel like that they're going to have to be able to contribute something pretty consistently on the offensive side of the floor because Jaden Springer's become a guy that we pretty much know is going to be there. We know what he's going to bring to the table. He is the one that makes their offense go. But elsewhere, there's more inconsistency. And I think if you can get those two guys to the level of being, 10-point game, they should get 10 points from each of those guys each game, I think that would go a long way for this Tennessee team if they want to actually make a run in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, the Lofton comp is not a fair one because we're talking about just, hey, let's drop in one of the greatest shooters in the history of the league and one of the greatest players in the history of the program. I mean, we could do that for a lot of teams and get different results, right? I mean, give Vanderbilt to Shane Foster or
Right.
Alabama
Yeah.
or Robert Ory or, name any combination of teams and players. And here we are with the super team. But I do think that's one thing. And you mentioned the other thing that I was going to get to. And I know Pons is coming off an injury, but Fulkerson, I look back, maybe it wasn't fair to saddle that kid with SEC Player of the Year expectations. No, you look at the way he ended the season, right? And he's getting his last 10 games or so, he's scoring 18, 20 a lot of nights or sometimes more. There were some games in there that were less than that. But I think the way he ended the season begat some expectations that maybe were out of line for his career. And my goodness, Blake, you look at him right now, he's just not much of a scoring factor. His last few games, working backwards, point totals 4, 4, 0, 8, 11, 4, 7.
Yeah.
Has not had more than 16 in an SEC game. And again, the Vols have enough weapons elsewhere, and they're so good defensively. Maybe that's where the difference is, too, is if Fulkerson is playing at that SEC level, that overshadows that 3-point issue. I mean, you can make up for deficiencies in one area with pluses in another area. That's just one place that I think a lot of us had built in an expectation for Tennessee that just has not materialized at anything close to where we thought it would.
I think Fulkerson, I was looking at the numbers while you were pointing them out. I think he started the season. He had 11 of their first 12 games. I think he was in double figures and pretty consistent in that 10 to 15, 16 range. But then, like you said, it's almost just like since that Missouri game, it's just been different. And I feel like they've got to get him back to where he was because if you just go down each of those and you look at those 11, I guess, again, I think it was 11 to 12 that they won to start the season, where he, scored in double digits at 11 of 12. The one game he didn't score in double digits against Alabama, they lost that game. And then you look at these games, like we said, they've been able to win some of these, but, they've come against Georgia or Kentucky or Mississippi State, teams that are really struggling. Whereas, being able to beat LSU or that red hot Ole Miss team or Missouri, teams like that with him only scoring, those few points, that's not going to get it done. So I'm very curious just to see how they finish the season. And I think, maybe the good news for Tennessee is knowing their offensive struggles. Luckily, they're going to get 2 rock fights probably coming up here pretty soon when they play South Carolina and Kentucky next, because I can't imagine that either one of those games are going to be that high scoring. I know the last one with Tennessee and Kentucky, what was it, last week, 82-71, but I just feel like those are 2 games that Tennessee probably going to use their defense to sort of methodically dissect both of those teams. So I don't know that the offense, maybe we're not talking about it as much over the next week or so, maybe just because of their opponents.
Rock fight gets brought up a lot on the show. I feel like we need to add Blake's rock fight of the week.
Well, listen,
to come.
Ole Miss and South Carolina for a little while there was that level. I don't know what it is. Like, I just feel like, I think we throw that around on Twitter and stuff all the time because there are just some of those games where it's, you feel like it's just a struggle. And, I don't know how it is sometimes, but there's some of these teams, and maybe it's just because some of these teams are pretty good on defense and they slow the game down and make it a little bit more, their style just by grinding it out, which if you go back to the Ole Miss Tennessee game, I think that's what we like to kind of use as our label of a rock fight, a 52-50 type of game. So there's quite a few of those, it seems like, in the SEC sometimes.
Yeah, and with Fulkerson, maybe some of it just rapport in terms of guards. I mean, last year they had Lamonte Turner. Oh gosh, who was their other guard?
Jordan Bowden. Yeah.
Jordan Bowden, yes. I mean, who seemed like they were there forever. So there's a comfort level with them. Now you've got the ball handling duties are going to Keon Johnson, who's first year player. Vescovi comes in midseason last year. He's handling the ball a lot. I mean, it's just a different dynamic on the perimeter. Maybe it's just these kids mesh differently with each other than they did last year. So I think it's fair to mention that. It's not like Fulkerson's a bad player, but when you're being hyped for potential SEC Player of the Year and you're struggling to crack 5 points a game recently, I mean, something's going on that's worth talking about, right?
Yeah, agreed. I think that's, we wouldn't just be saying it, I think, if it was just for a guy that we expected to be, the third guy off the bench or just a role player. But like you said, this was a guy that had potential player of the year type expectations. And so when you see a team that's struggling, and again, it's not like Tennessee's a bad team. It's just, I think maybe the expectations, or maybe some of us are wrong. Maybe I was wrong about thinking that they could be a Final Four team. Maybe that was too high for a team that was going to have to rely on these underclassmen at guards, and say, well, maybe these guys just aren't to that next level yet because they're still young, outside of Fulkerson and Pond. So I think that's something too, that maybe we just misread this team a little bit. But I think you see the potential. That's what it's probably frustrating for Tennessee fans, I'm sure, is you see the potential of this team, but then you see things like this where you're like, man, if we just had that one guy that we thought was going to be able to give us 10 or 12 a game, do it every single game, which again, he did halfway through the season, but for some reason just has not been there to that level here over the past, 7 or 8 games or so.
The other headliner was Arkansas going on the road and beating Missouri. We said that Arkansas was doing really well in the computer rankings, but it had to start banking wins. That was a huge first step, and what was just a really interesting basketball game to watch, one that went into overtime. But I really loved the way that Arkansas played down the stretch. I thought Jalen Tate was really good for them, comes up with a big block late in that one. But in terms of what you want for the league, in terms of getting bids, that's the outcome you want. I don't think it really hurt Missouri. In fact, it didn't seem to hurt Missouri much at all in the net rankings. And again, the Tigers have banked so many good wins. I think it's going to be hard to knock them out, barring just a disastrous collapse. But, it also helped, too, to do it without Jeremiah Tillman. I think that made things easier for Connor Vanover in the paint. He played really well again, but I really liked the way that Tate and Moody and Justin Smith, too. That's not a guy we talk about a lot, but those three kids and Vanover were just really big for the Razorbacks in Columbia.
Yeah, I felt you brought up the Tillman thing. I was going to say, I feel like that certainly he would have an impact on that game. Arkansas shot 51% from 2. You feel like maybe he's able to affect a few more shots if he's in there, but overall, I think you can't argue with the balance that you got from Arkansas here, and that's what we said with this team is, it seems like with this team in particular, they have those guys. Like you feel like you have, several guys that you can go to in some of these spots. And I think that's something that they have going for them right now, because this team is 16-5. And, we had all that conversation about, man, we just want Arkansas to beat one of these good teams because we think they're pretty good. We just want to actually see them beat a team like this, because that would really do a whole lot for their resume. And it did. I mean, this is a big step for them. And I think just the way they played, like you said, watching that game, man, they really played well. And I thought that, Missouri made some big plays down the stretch. Drew Smith made the pass there to Parker Braun at the end of regulation, which they had to lay up to send it to overtime. I thought, okay, Missouri maybe is getting this momentum back. They're going to go into overtime and have a chance. But it just turns out that Arkansas were the ones that made the plays. And I thought it was something where, when you shoot 87% from the free throw line, too, you get there 23 times. If you can shoot that way on the road, that's always going to help you. I thought this was certainly, and you probably can't argue against it just based on their season, but biggest win of the season for Arkansas. But I also thought it was probably one of the more impressive performances of the season, too, just because of how they played down the stretch.
Yeah, and in case people are wondering, Tillman, I believe, had a death in the family. That was the reason for his absence. I thought, goodness, I don't know really what stands out in this one from Missouri. I mean, Xavier Pinson was really good again. Parker Braun took on a much bigger role without Pickett out. That's a guy we don't ever see that much. And I thought he played fair. He had a big bucket for them that helped get that one into overtime. But for Missouri, I don't think this really changes much. Again, you get Tillman back soon. I would presume the next game, and that's a bit of a game changer for Missouri. I mean, that's one. I guess if you're Missouri, you look at it, you say we didn't have our big man, who's one of our best three players, hands down. And I was talking to Gabe DeArmond, who runs PowerMizzou.com. Gabe and I are good friends. I said, tell me who Missouri's best player is. And Gabe said it's Drew Smith. I said, well, that's one of three, and I'm curious as to how you'd answer. He said, yeah, I think that Smith is just a guy that when he's in there, defenses have to defend them differently. But maybe if you look at the key stat, Drew Smith has 6 turnovers in that one. And in a game where it goes to overtime, as decided near the end, you start looking for little things. And I think for Missouri, frankly, that's 2 big things. Is it Smith's 6 turnovers and Pickett's absence, or things that were probably difference makers for the Tigers?
Yeah, I thought that, Arkansas is a team, just with how they play sometimes, I think you're always going to see them be in positions, which I don't know if their numbers are, I'd have to look at them just to kind of measure them against other teams around the country. But the way they play, I think sometimes with the way they pressure the ball, which, that's what Muss wants. The way they play defense, I think that they're always going to force some of those mistakes. And like you said, I mean, Drew Smith had 6 of them here, and that was something that certainly played a role. And I think I think when you look at Arkansas's lineup too, like that's something that's maybe sometimes we sort of underrate with them is they're a pretty big team when you think about just kind of what their size is and where they play guys, like at what position. They've got pretty much 6'3", 6'6", 6'7", 6'6" across the board, where you're not maybe playing 2 guards at all times that are 6 foot or below. Like they've got bigger guards now, and I think that helps them match up better. And of course, it doesn't hurt when you have Vanover out there on the floor, at 7'3" either, or someone like Jalen Williams, at 6'10". So I think those are things that they come into play with how Arkansas plays defense, which their defensive numbers are really good. But at the same time, I still think Drew Smith is one of those guys that, man, he is just that guy for Missouri, and he's the reason why they've had so much success this season. I thought coming in, he's been one of the more just undervalued guys in the SEC. We've seen, the past couple seasons now, and just what he does for that team is pretty incredible. But like you said, the turnovers didn't help here, and it really was. I thought it was both teams made plays down the stretch, but really it was just Arkansas, being the ones that made more plays, and I think you got to give them credit for that.
All right, I don't mean to pick on Kentucky here, but tell me honestly, gun to your head, are you not thinking Kentucky's going to find some creative way to blow this thing down the stretch, and then if they don't file a 3-point shooter in a situation where that's one of the few things you can do to give them a chance? But Kentucky does hang on, frankly, was due to win one of these games. And so for the Wildcats, at least something to feel good about heading out of the weekend.
Isn't it so crazy that we look at Kentucky this year, and every year before that I've been watching college basketball and I've watched Kentucky games, I always get the sense that if there is a close game at Rupp Arena, I'm like, all right, Kentucky's probably going to find a way to win this game. I feel like every game I've watched Kentucky play this year at Rupp Arena, I'm like, you know what? Kentucky's probably going to find a way to lose this game. And it's such a different dynamic that I'm used to seeing when watching this team. And it is so different. I thought the same thing in this game. I'm like, my goodness, Auburn's about to find a way to actually win this game. But I did too. I picked Kentucky going in, just making picks like I do. I know people get kind of a kick out of that sometimes, but really just random picks. And I, for some reason, I just thought Kentucky was going to win this game going into it. But the way it played out, I'm like, oh my goodness, here comes Auburn making the run down the stretch and thinking that they may actually, find a way to win this game. So I don't know what the takeaway is here for Kentucky, to be honest with you. I said it yesterday too. If you're Kentucky and you hit 11 threes, I mean, that's if you're Auburn, you're probably thinking, well, it's probably going to be hard to win. And it kind of was, because this is just not a team. All we've talked about all season is about how they can't really shoot the ball. But I think that, they hit 11 threes here. They were able to do some things well. They got a lot of offensive rebounds, even though Auburn did too. But this was just one of those games where I don't know really what we learned at all from this game. I really kept saying that to myself as I'm watching. I'm like, we already knew Shreve Cooper's great. Like maybe JT Thor, maybe he's the talk of Auburn probably because he had a fantastic game, 24 points in 27 minutes. He had 9 rebounds, a couple blocks. I thought he played really well. But for Kentucky, what did we learn? I don't know how much we learned for Kentucky really in this one.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that one too. Because nothing jumps out at me off the box score. I mean, B.J. Boston had 17 points, but they're not that efficient. Of course, he's been a constant topic of discussion up there. Isaiah Jackson's played really well. Not a guy we
Yeah.
talk about a lot, but one of the better defenders in the league. I think 18 and 11 for him with a couple of blocks. And he drew 7 fouls. That's one thing that sticks out a little bit too. So I'm with you. Nothing that just pops off the page, but those are some things. For Auburn, you mentioned JT Thor. That kid's a really exciting young player. I mean, we talk
Yeah.
about Cooper a lot, but man, that kid is a difference maker because he's got some skills. He can handle the ball. He gets 24 and 9, but this Auburn team is so young. I mean, it's not surprising that Auburn's struggling because you put the profile of a young team out there as young as they are, you would expect that. But that's one of those games that I guess Auburn was due for one of those. Although Auburn's lost some close ones recently, but I guess you shouldn't be surprised. A young team going to Rupp Arena can't close it out.
Do you know what Auburn's record is now at Kentucky? This one's this is one of those that I think will kind of blow you away unless you just actually think about it. 2-50. They are 2-50 in Lexington, so that doesn't help either. And it seems like we've seen some of those teams even over the past couple of years that Bruce Pearl's had at Auburn. That the Final 14 team's been really good, and they just go up to Auburn and they go up to Kentucky and they just get shellacked. And I think that's something too where it's just one of those weird stats that Auburn just rarely finds ways to win at Kentucky. So that probably didn't help either. But I mean, you said it with like JT Thor. Think about it. I mean, we talk about why is Bruce Pearl so excited, even though this team is not going to the NCAA tournament. They're back to whatever 500 now, I think, overall in the season. And the reason is because outside of Jamal Johnson, he's really the only guy that's not an underclassman that's playing significant minutes. Everybody else, freshmen and sophomores. And so I can understand why Bruce Pearl's excited because if you get the majority of those guys back, you've got something to build on there. So I can understand his excitement, even with them kind of having a frustrating season at times.
Well, in the last month, Auburn has either won every game or been right there at the end. I think other than Baylor, which is losing by 14 at Baylor to that team, no shame at all. But
Right.
every other game has been, a half dozen points or less in terms of losing,
Yeah.
or it's been a win. So, I mean, Auburn is right there again with a bunch of kids that we're going to see again. I mean, Shreve Cooper is the one, right? Does he? What do
Right.
scouts think of him? Is he back next year? And I don't know where that discussion stands at the moment, but boy, you bring him back with that class of other kids, and you're talking about a preseason top 10 team, I think minimum next year if they get all these guys back.
Yeah, and Ken Palm, they're 346th in experience. So, I mean, bottom 5 in terms of youngest teams in the country. So, I think them losing those close games, like that's the thing. If you drop another, we're dropping players into lineups all over the place today, but if you drop another junior or another senior in there, maybe they win a couple of those games when you actually think about it. Because if you go through their schedule this season, like lost at A&M by 2, lost at home to Alabama by 4, lost at Arkansas by 2, lost at home to Georgia by 5, lost to Ole Miss at home by 2 in overtime, losing Kentucky by 2. So they have played a lot of close games. So maybe that's the difference. If you just had one other guy, maybe as an upperclassman, somebody that had been there a year or two, maybe that would make a difference in those kind of games.
Well, we bragged on Alabama's defense all day Friday. So, of course, the Tide put up 115 this weekend on Georgia, right?
My goodness, 115 points. Like, that's just, I don't know, man. Like, just watching this team, you knew, like, the 105 points they put up at LSU, that was impressive. But I'm telling you, like, 115 points they just put up in an SEC game. Now, Georgia, we talk about LSU's defense. Like, Georgia struggles on defense. Let's be honest. But I don't care who you're playing. They scored 115 points in this game. What was the stat? I tried to find it. Somebody put out the stat, how long it's been since Alabama scored 115 against an SEC opponent. But I want to say it's been 60 years or so. So just an unbelievable performance.
All right. What's your guess on points per possession for Alabama in that one?
Oh my goodness. I mean, how many? I don't know. I probably wouldn't even give a good guess, but it's got to be way up there.
1.4. How often do you see
Wow.
that?
Well, almost one and a half. Oh yeah, that's they were it was a performance. There's no other way to put it. And you just go up and down the line like everybody got some of the action too. It wasn't like you just had a couple guys. Like everybody was in there making shots. They hit 18 threes. They hit 18 threes and they shot 60% from 3. 18 of 30 from 3. And then they shot 83% from the free throw line. That's what I think is impressive. They shot 70% from 2. So I think it's a combination of Alabama's just can be really unbelievable on offense, and I think Georgia's defense. I think Tom Crean's going to be going over that tape a little bit here since that they have kind of struggled on that side here recently.
Well, and they have this quick strike thing that maybe beats anything we see with anybody in the league. LSU might have an argument there, but I'm watching that game. I'm keeping one eye on that and doing some laundry, and I get called away for a minute to deal with the kids or something. And Georgia's in this little thing where they're hanging around 10 or 12 with about 15 minutes left. I mean, I come back a few minutes later, and that game's well into the 20s, and it is over.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like it was pretty much highlighted by that last. Did you see the Darius Miles dunk at the end?
Oh,
Um,
my goodness, yes. The bench went nuts for that one, too.
they went nuts, and I think it was just one where, my goodness, that pretty much told you everything. Like this guy comes in and just has a dunk like that, and Alabama could do no wrong in this game on offense.
Georgia now takes Vandy's place as the worst defensive team in league play, which Vanderbilt had a pretty substantial lead, if you want to put it that way, for a while. I mean, I thought Vandy was going to put up some historically bad defensive numbers in the league. And we'll get to the Commodores in a minute, but Georgia's managed to outdo Vanderbilt at this point.
Yeah, if you look on KenPom, Georgia's numbers, a lot of red, like we said, the green and the red. You want the green, you don't want the red. And if you look at Georgia's defense, there is a lot of red on there when it comes to just the overall numbers. So a bit of a struggle there for the Bulldogs right now.
Let's get into Vandy for a minute, because that was, I think, maybe the surprise of the weekend. The Commodores, I mean, I guess if you'd said Vandy wins this game, I'm not shocked, right? Because the spread on that was 7.5 points. But to see Vanderbilt go down to Starkville and, I mean, just pound them almost from the opening tip. I mean, Scottie Pippen hits 3 2-pointers in the first 2 minutes and 10 seconds or so, and they just get off to the races. I think State caught them, but the Vandy hits another spurt. I think goes 15-0, 17-0 just before the half. State never really got close in that one. But once again for Vanderbilt, when Scottie Pippen posts one of those really good assist to turnover ratio games, and he was 9-4 with that, the scoring tailed off. He gets those 11 or 9 points quickly and only ends up with 18. But I was really surprised the way Vanderbilt went into Starkville and controlled that game. Vanderbilt, I don't believe, had given up fewer than 72 or 73 points in any SEC game, and State ends with a 51 on the scoreboard.
Yeah, I thought, you mentioned Scottie Pippen. The two guys, and it really at this point, like it feels like Cleavon Brown and Max Evans have been there for I don't know how long. Because I don't know, it just feels like they've been there forever. But I guess when you think about kind of what the program has gone through over the years, it's felt kind of longer probably, just given everything they went through since the time they stepped on campus there to where things are now. But those two guys really, those two guys were huge in this game too. And I thought that just the way they played certainly helped, because that's been the conversation outside of Scottie Pippen, Dylan DeSue. We've talked about those two guys the most for Vanderbilt this season. It's like, okay, what are you going to get consistently on a night-in-night-out basis from everyone else? And I don't know that we've always had the answer to that, but, getting Cleavon Brown back, getting a game like that from him, and then to have Max Evans, which we've seen him, sporadically put up these big numbers offensively. That's what this team has to have to be able to win these games in the SEC. And I think that, easier said than done against some of the better teams in the conference, which, they're going to have Alabama coming up here pretty soon. I know they've got Kentucky before they do that, but I think it's one where we know what Vanderbilt needs to do to win. Like, it can't just be Scottie Pippen every night. It can't just be Dylan DeSue. They've got to have other guys contributing at a high level, and you got that in this game. And you see what happens when you get there. And, they played pretty well and did a good job on the defensive end of the floor, being able to stop Mississippi State. Mississippi State didn't shoot it well from three. They only got to the free throw line 4 times. That's a stat right there. A team at home only getting to the free throw line 4 times. That's got to be a season low, I would think, for Mississippi State. But just a really good overall performance, I thought, from the Commodores.
Well, two things from the state end. One, DJ Stewart has slumped a little bit lately, and they've got to have big scoring games from him. They don't have to. They've had some wins without him, and they've had some big scoring games with him when they don't win. But lately, he's really struggled, and they've lost 3 of 4. And the one game that he played well in that span is the one that they won. The other thing, I thought State just crushed them in the paint the last time those two teams played. And I thought between Dew and some of their bigs, Tulu Smith being the other one, but the main guy that is, I thought that State really, between quickness at guard, which Vanderbilt has issues with, and between those two big guys, I just thought that was a really favorable matchup for MSU, but their bigs didn't really show up in that one much either.
Yeah, Mississippi State's had their struggles here recently. We kind of talked about them, and they're kind of, I guess, up and down nature is probably the best way to put it with them. They won that game in South Carolina the way they did after coming off that 45-point game at Arkansas. Then they come back and have the shootout with LSU, and then, they can only put up 51 here against Vanderbilt. So I just think they're one. I said it, I think we've talked about it before. I honestly, if you'd asked me to pick my 1 through 14 going into the season, I probably would have put Mississippi State at 12 or 13, to be honest with you. And I just didn't know that over the long haul, if this team was going to be able to maybe have the season that some people thought they would, just because they, like Auburn and others, were just relying on so many underclassmen, in addition, to Abdul Adu, who, again, really the only older guy on this roster that's playing significant minutes. Everybody else is young, and I think having to kind of mix all these new guys in together because of the roster turnover they had, they had guys transfer, they had Reggie Perry go to the NBA, all of that. I just thought it was going to be a difficult thing for them to do there. And so that's just one where I don't know that I'm exactly shocked in kind of seeing how Mississippi State's played here over the past month or so.
Well, Ole Miss has really crept up towards the bubble discussion again. And I think, do I remember this correctly, was in Joe Lunardi's first 4 out?
I want to say Saturday. They got, I don't know if maybe like they were on the next 4 out, but they were at the very top of it. But they're, maybe it was like by the end of the night, they could have actually moved to the first 4 out. But either way, like I'd say they're in that 4 to 6 range in terms of teams that are out at this point, would be my guess.
Well, the interesting thing for them, defensively, that's a very good team, but the offense just hadn't come. And even when they beat Tennessee 4 games ago, it's 52-50, and we're just thinking, okay, the Vols struggle on offense at times. It's not a surprise that Ole Miss can lock people down. But you look at the 3 games since, Ole Miss has shot, I believe, over 50% from the field in each of those games. And Devontae Shuler just goes off for 31, playing not from his hometown. But, the last 3 games for them, 86, 80, and 81. Now, look, Auburn is not a lockdown defensive team, and South Carolina has some nights where it's not exactly that either. But you throw 80 on Missouri in between with Tillman playing, and all of a sudden you're looking at this and you're going, you like the direction they're headed in offensively. And again, 2 games ago it was Jarkel Joyner. Now it is Shuler. I think the game or 2 before that, Romello White pops up for 30. So you're starting to see a path to offensive consistency because it's coming from different guys at different positions.
Well, this is, I think you're right, and this was kind of one that we talked about on the last episode of the podcast. I thought this was a tricky spot for Ole Miss just because of the wild nature of South Carolina, not knowing what you're going to get from them. I just thought it was a game that I would not have been shocked at all to see South Carolina win this game, but I thought that, and I think we brought up the stat too, that the last game, like that, Ole Miss had scored 80 in back-to-back games for the first time this season, and you just said it. they keep the streak going here by scoring 81. That has been the difference for them. Like if they would have done that throughout the season, if they had gotten on that level of offense like they have these past 3 games, I mean, they'd be a tournament team right now without question, because they would have won some of those games, like they had against some of those teams, like even a Georgia. We mentioned the 2 games against Georgia; those are the ones they probably want back the most. So when you think about it, for them there, those are 2 they'd love to have back. But when they play offense like this and they can score and get what they got from Devontae Shuler, it's just a different team because they are so good on defense. And I think that's something that is going to continue to be their strength, but it's like their offense just has not even been close to that level. So to get it the way they have, they're on a 4-game winning streak now. They've played really well in offense the last 3 games. And you would think, now they've added this game against LSU on Wednesday. You would think against LSU, you're probably going to have a chance to put up some points too. So I wouldn't be surprised if they hit the 80-point mark again. So this has really turned out, I think, in a really good spot for Ole Miss, just in the way they played and given their upcoming schedule. 2 home games coming up against LSU, Mississippi State. They got to go to Missouri and Vanderbilt after that. But as we've seen, I think, 2 places you could win at if you're Ole Miss playing well. So I really feel like Ole Miss is in a good spot. And by the way, I am going to classify this as our rock fight of the weekend, only through like the first 12 minutes of this game. You realize it was 12-12 with 8 minutes left in this game, or in the first half, excuse me. So this got off to a slow start. It was not a great offensive performance through the first 12 minutes, but things really turned up from there, and there was a lot of scoring down the stretch at the end of that first half. So these 2 really turned it up after a bit of a slow start.
Yeah, there was a funny tweet. I'm trying to find it as we're doing the podcast. It's from my buddy Brad Logan down in Mississippi. And it was something along the lines of summary of the Ole Miss game, foul, 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 timeout, foul, foul, foul. So I think he would agree with you on the rock fight description. And by the way, as he pointed out, Ole Miss also attempted 44 foul shots. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, this got back to the SEC levels I think we're used to seeing when we complain about the officiating or the number of fouls in this league sometimes, because you had 44 for Ole Miss, you had 29 for South Carolina. And by the way, if you actually watch the game, Ole Miss did everything they could to try to give that game away down the stretch.
Oh my goodness. That was one of those, like, this is impossible that they can lose this, but man, they came close. Goodness gracious.
South Carolina, what was it? South Carolina missed some free throws too, I think, late. And then they had some shots at it, but they just couldn't take advantage. So they did. Ole Miss, they tried to give it away late, but luckily able to hold on there.
And Justin Minai got a little banged up late in that one too, which probably didn't help.
Right. That didn't.
I found the tweet. Here it is. Brad Logan, let's recap the Ole Miss South Carolina game. Foul, 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 technical foul, foul, foul.
Yep.
So there you go.
That's summed it up.
That's a good way to sum it up. But I'm bugged now because I cannot find this thing. I could have sworn I heard it on the broadcast that Lenardi had now put Ole Miss in his first 4 out. I don't know if he did a preliminary thing where the bracket didn't come up or I misheard something, but I think you heard the same thing I did too.
Yeah.
But his latest bracketology, which is through February the 12th, so would have missed Saturday's game, does not have Ole Miss in there, but perhaps he made some sort of on the fly, okay, this is what it looks like now. I'm not going to print the full bracket. But the bigger thing is the Rebels now are 55 in the net, up from 57. And let's see, upcoming games. Like you said, that LSU game, that's the one that LSU just had. We talked about the Tigers needing to bank wins. They win that one on Wednesday. I'm very interested to see if most people have them in the brackets.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, it's going to be interesting because here you go. You know what? I just found it. So he didn't update his bracket on the site, but he did update his bracket on Twitter, it looks like. So I scrolled through this. This is from 10:30 on Saturday night. So this would have been after the Ole Miss South Carolina game, right? So he has Ole Miss in the next 4 out. He has them as the second team out in the next 4 out. So they're the 6th team out right now. They're behind UConn, St. Louis, Richmond, Penn State, and Maryland. So that's what they're fighting, I think, to get into that spot. And let me see, actually, he moved, where is it? Alabama is the second 2 seed. It looks like actually Missouri dropped off of the 4 seeds, which I probably not surprising after the loss to Arkansas. Tennessee would be the top number 4 seed, even with the loss, I guess, to LSU. So that's kind of where he has things sitting right now. So I think if you're Ole Miss, you've just you got to keep winning, because that's still, you're in that next 4 out now. But I think if you beat LSU, I think you easily jump into that first 4 out, and then from there, like we said, I think maybe the issue Ole Miss is going to run into is they really would need to win that Missouri game. Well, they pretty much need to win out, I would say, at that point, if they really wanted to feel good about their spot heading into the SEC tournament.
Yeah, the computers all see Tennessee right in that 3 to 4 seed range, but there's just some things that look odd about that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm looking at Ken Palm. Oh, here sits Tennessee at 7-5. And according to Ken Palm, the ninth toughest strength of schedule in the conference. Now, look, they consider the whole thing, right? And you got to go back and look what the Vols did. A win against Colorado, that really helped things. I guess the Cincinnati win doesn't really help anything now. And we're in an area where the era now, I guess, where teams do look at Ken Palm, or people do look at that. They feel like it's got a lot of predictive value. Everybody knows what Tennessee was coming into the year, right? We expected the Vols to be good. We know they're talented. We know about the defense, all those things we talk about. But it does look really weird to look up and see an SEC team that's 7-5, and it's not been a just difficult SEC schedule by comparison. But they're a solid 4 seed, and I can't really argue with it either.
Yeah, they're in a strange spot, I think, because like you said, I don't know if it's just because we just had such high expectations coming in. It's like, man, they felt disappointing, but I guess when you think about it, I mean, they're still 14-5, and I mean, all 5 of those losses come in conference play. But it's like, I don't know. There's just something about that Tennessee team, like we said. I'm with you. It feels a little different, but I don't know. Just by the way, Ole Miss, we talked about them being in the next 4 out. I had to look this up, but he had his last 4 in as of last night were Drake, Boise State, Colorado State, and Stanford. Boise State and Stanford won their games. I think he would have put this up before their games were over, because I think they played later. So they both won. So they're not going to drop out probably. Drake, he had as his last 4 in too. They lost that game. They got blown out yesterday by Loyola Chicago, or on Saturday. But they won the rematch on Sunday. So I have a feeling they're not going anywhere. So that's something too to keep in mind, is when you're a team like Ole Miss and you're trying to push to get into that group, you want to start rooting against some of those teams that are right there on that edge, because that's the best way to get past them. But I think an LSU win would catapult Ole Miss into the first 4 out. But I still think they're gonna they would pretty much, I really need to win out, I feel like, at that point, to be able to feel like they're gonna feel good about things going into the SEC tournament.
Yeah, just as an aside for hoops nerds, Drake was the third to last unbeaten team.
Yeah.
And what an odd week it is for these guys. Okay, listen to this. You're 18-0 heading into a road game at Valparaiso, which is 194 in Ken Palm. You lose that one by 17. You come home, you blow out Northern Iowa. You get your clock cleaned by a pretty good Loyola Chicago team yesterday, as you said, 81-54, and then win the rematch a day later, 51-50 in overtime.
Yeah. Valpo, not Bryce Drew's Valpo. So that was a surprising loss, the way they lost that game. What is it, a week or so ago? But I don't know if we've talked about this on this podcast before, but like you said, if you're a hoops nerd and you enjoy college basketball, if you spent 15 minutes of your day looking up the research that people have done on these back-to-backs in mid-major conferences, it is fascinating to see how some of these games play out when teams play on back-to-back days. The first game, like you said, that Loyola Chicago game, Drake loses by 27 and they turn around and win by 1 the next game. That is the norm, it seems like. It goes the complete opposite way when these teams play back-to-backs, and I'm so fascinated by how that plays out, because I don't know what it is, but I would love to kind of just break down the full data on that and how and why these games just go the complete opposite direction the next time they play.
Yeah, and those games were both at Drake. So anyway, you brought up Bryce Drew and Valparaiso. So let's let's entertain that one a minute for the Vandy brethren out there listening. He's doing pretty well at Grand Canyon this year.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think Lodich at Valpo might be on his last season. Any chance he goes back and returns to where it worked for him?
That, I mean, I guess if you think about it, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for him to ever go back there. Is it this next year? I don't know, but I really don't think it's. I could see that being a situation where, you know what, and look, this guy's still really young, right? Like, he's still going to be coaching for a long time, but I could definitely see a situation where he, at some point just decides to go back there and retire there and, try to turn them into Loyola Chicago, what they've become now under Porter Moser and, programs like that, or, make them the Belmont tier of, as we said, you talk about another team, Belmont's on a roll too, but just kind of get Valpo back to that level to where they were, those last 2 years he was there before he took the Vanderbilt job, because Grand Canyon's one too. Dan Marley was there, and I know they got frustrated because they just felt like they should be winning more games. And Bryce Drew walks in, and here they are winning games. So,
yeah, well, we've budgeted more time than we plan on Valparaiso today. But one interesting thing about that, though, Valparaiso switched leagues. The Horizon to the Missouri Valley, which is a pretty good step up there. So I don't know if that makes it more or less likely that he'd want to go back. But, I mean, he certainly did extremely well there. That was always fascinating to me, that it didn't work out better at Vandy for him, because they really dominated that league. And I know you could say it's Horizon League and everything, but you also recruit against other teams in your league. I just thought that when Vanderbilt made that hire, I never expected it to go as badly as it did. And, of course, the first year he's there, they get into the tournament. But it's just been, it was miserable for him that year. They go 0-18. He loses his job. We thought he didn't leave Jerry Stackhouse a lot, but, I mean, he did leave him 2 NBA guards that they didn't do much with when both of them were healthy. It's just been a really bizarre run for Bryce Drew and Vanderbilt. I think if you had gone back and said, okay, Vandy hires Bryce Drew 4 years ago, here's the series of events that are going to unfold, including him bringing the first 2 All-Americans in program history there. I mean, if you had said this is how it's going to play out, you just would have dismissed anybody as a kook.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like we talked about on a previous episode, I think just to kind of see the numbers and where the program's at, it's not something you and I probably thought we'd see anytime soon. And as we said, there's probably blame to go around on a lot of different levels, but it's something, man. And it just, to me, it goes back, and this is a conversation I'm sure we will have eventually, but I think about the recruiting versus the player development aspect of this stuff. And when we look at mid-major coaches, I think in all the success they had, and I think sometimes maybe you see people saying, well, just because one guy went to a power conference level and wasn't able to maybe, kind of replicate that success that he had, from what he did at the mid-major level. I think that's not always true. And I think there's so many things that go into having a successful program. And I think sometimes, look, I get the recruiting rankings and all this other stuff, but man, I still feel like at the end of the day, like, player development is number one, and you have to be able to develop the guys that you get, even because you're not always going to be able to you're not going to be Kentucky, you're not going to be Duke, you're not going to be getting 5 stars at every position all the time. And I just think, the player development aspect of it, that's so important. And you know what, Chris, I'll say this, that is something I think when you look at what Vanderbilt's done here recently, we talked about their win against Mississippi State. Like, I can see some of these players getting better. And I think that's probably what you can look at and say, all right, these guys are getting better, but the program is still to a point to where I think they just got so far behind that just getting better is still taking a while to get them back to the level where they want to be.
Well, let's backdoor into another conversation for a minute, okay? Jerry Stackhouse got a lot of headlines for a lot of wrong reasons this weekend,
right.
And I don't think I want to rehash all of them, but the thing that's interesting with that fan base is he lost a lot of his support this weekend. I mean, a lot of fans did not care that they went down to Starkville and won. They're still pretty hacked off about a lot of the stuff he said. And frankly, I think they've got a right to be. I didn't think that Jerry handled that very well. But the problem with them is you look forward to the recruiting, and it's just not been very good. You don't see a class of kids ahead or a junior commit who's just going to turn around and change the trajectory of the program. And look, they weren't playing very well with Pippen and Dessou. And Dessou's leading the league in rebounding. Pippen is second in scoring. They're both very good players. Over and over, you've got to have a third and fourth guy. Well, now they've had Max Evans and Cleavon Brown step up for them in different ways lately, but those kids are both gone next year. So presumably, I'm almost sure that Brown is. I don't think he'd come back for a sixth year. You've got to get into grad school at Vandy if you're going to do that. That means you've got to have the desire and the ability to get into a program that they offer, and that's really tough. But you look at this, and the path for Jerry Stackhouse is just really hard to envision. And then let's say they lose a Pippen because of the transfer rule. And I think Scotty is from the West Coast. He's going to be a hot commodity. If he hits the transfer market, you get to pass out. I don't know. Sometimes you look at that situation from the outside and you might say, well, I don't understand what people are ticked off about. They've done this, they've done that, and they've got these players that he's developed. You start looking at the path ahead and what he's bringing in and what could happen, and it becomes really tricky for Jerry Stackhouse and Vanderbilt the next couple of years. Jerry's got to find some good news and frankly start getting out of the headlines for the wrong reasons, for jumping into fans' direct messages and for calling the media names and stuff. Man, just stick to basketball and coach your team. Coaches preach about tuning out the noise, and Jerry really has not done a very good job of doing that recently.
You talk about the path forward. I think too, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I just think to step into the SEC and where it is now, knowing that again, if this had been, pick a year when the SEC was struggling, whatever year you want to use, many years ago or however, when we got three teams getting into the tournament and everybody else is at best a solid NIT team. Like, it's just, you walk in now and like we've said before, the room for error is so little to this point to where I think it's just, it can magnify some of the things. And when you're a program, especially, again, you're a program that lost every game you played and you had the long losing streak in league play. When you lost all those games, and it's just, I don't know, like it's going to take something, again, to a very high level to even, I think, consistently get back to being in the middle of the conference, much less being back to trying to be a team that's in that top 4 or top 5. And I don't know. I don't know exactly what the path forward looks like for this Vanderbilt program because, like you said, it's we knew it was going to be, I think, a tough thing for them when he took the job. But I think as you get more into it, it's like, man, we knew this was going to be tough, but like you're still looking ahead and saying, all right, what are the things that they're doing now that you feel like they're going to be able to eclipse? Like we said, if you just take some of the teams that are in the middle right now, Mississippi State, maybe Georgia, South Carolina, Auburn, teams like that. We know Auburn's kind of an outlier this year, but I keep thinking about that. It's like, what are they going to be able to do to elevate themselves above the middle of the pack in the SEC to get to that point and stay there consistently? I still don't know that I know the answer to that question.
Okay, let's hit it in a little bit of a different way, although you touched on some of this, okay? You look at the 6 teams that we think are going to make the NCAA tournament at this point. Do we see a big downturn for Alabama? And I don't know that Crimson Tide is a 2 every year, but did we see that program dropping off under Nate Oates?
Nope.
Did we see Arkansas dropping off much under Eric Musselman? And oh, by the way, that I think the Hogs have got some upside beyond where they are.
Yeah, they're not going anywhere.
Okay, LSU is the one that we can talk about for the NCAA sanctions that have been hanging over that program indefinitely for 3 years and change now, I guess it's been. Goodness, has it been that long?
I know. When did it start? It started in 2017, right? Was it 2018 or 17?
I think so. I think it was a hot summer day. I remember I was out walking the block and the news broke and listening to a podcast about that. But it was definitely,
I don't remember.
Who would have thought that this would not have resolved? I mean, Mike White at Florida, I don't think he's going to get them back to being Billy Donovan, but they're good every year.
Yeah,
he was very good at Louisiana Tech. Tennessee under Rick Barnes, I don't think that program's going anywhere. Missouri is probably going to drop off. I think this is a little bit of a higher watermark for Conzo Martin. But I think Ole Miss under Kermit Davis is going to be at this level of competitiveness or better. Kentucky, of course, is going to get back to where it's been. Auburn, we talked about as a potential top 10 team next year, depending on who comes back. Mississippi State under Ben Howland been pretty consistent. I guess you start having questions when you get to the bottom there of Georgia, South Carolina, A&M. But Buzz Williams has done really good things at two schools. Frank Martin's at least been to a Final Four. Carolina is always going to be a team that's going to win probably 6 or 7 games in the league in a bad year. Georgia's the wild card. I think that's the one where it's not gone very well for Tom Crean. Someone pointed out this week, and I wish I could give credit where it was due. Mark Fox, I think, was something like 78 and 76 at Athens.
Yeah.
Crean is, I think, 12 and 30 something. That was a little bit glaring when I saw it. So that's the one that I think Vandy and Georgia are the two schools that I have a little bit of an issue with going forward of how does this get a lot better. I think South Carolina is the other one because, frankly, Frank Martin has only been to one NCAA tournament. Fortunately for him, that ended in a Final Four. That's the other one that I think I don't know that I see Carolina pulling that off again. But again, that's not a team that's going to go 3-15 in the SEC based on his track record. They're always going to win their share of games. I think that's where it becomes really problematic for Vanderbilt and maybe to a lesser degree Georgia.
Yeah, and right. So at best, we're talking about maybe there are 4 teams potentially that could just completely fall off and get to that level, maybe near the bottom, and stay there for 2 or 3 years at one time. So that's the problem, right? Because you've got, 9 or 10 teams ahead there. So we don't think that there are maybe 9 teams that are going anywhere. And if anything, 9 of those teams are probably either going to either stay where they're at or only get stronger. So that's the thing. And I think, again, that goes back to me to where when the Vanderbilt program dropped off to the level that it did, being able to make up that ground in this era of SEC basketball, I think you had to understand from the beginning that it was going to take a while. But even now, I think you look at it and say, I don't know, like it's still to the point to where it's like, I don't know how quickly even they're able to get back to that middle of the pack and be there consistently. Because as we said, we feel like there are 9, maybe 10 programs that really aren't going anywhere. And to be able to eclipse them, you've kind of put yourself behind at this point to where it's going to take a lot more to be able to eclipse those teams. And you mentioned the recruiting and stuff like that. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, I think, how all parties kind of approach it here moving forward.
Well, it's going to be difficult anyway for him, and it's going to be worse with the fan base that I would say, from what I'm seeing, is not behind him anymore.
Yeah, well, that's a problem too. When you don't have the fans, we know that can take things in another direction pretty quickly. We can say that about. I mean, again, we can look at the coaching changes in the SEC, right? Look at the ones we've seen over the past however many years. That's usually one part that certainly plays into it when it comes to that too. So,
Blake, we covered a lot of ground. It seems like we do every day on this podcast. It's been a lot of fun, but we will have, I think, some exciting things developing later in the week. We are certainly going to have a couple of baseball podcasts. I think we will probably run those on Tuesday and Thursday, but I'm not going to guarantee that. But you might, if you're a baseball fan, thinking, okay, when are their preview shows going to come out? I think that's kind of tentatively when we were thinking. Of course, baseball kicks off Friday. We'll have games to cover Tuesday night and Wednesday night. And, man, this is getting to be just my most fun time of the year. We're right on top of it, but because we're getting well, I won't say we're getting out of the cold because I'm sitting here freezing in Nashville and it's 24 degrees as we do this, and it's only going to get worse. But we've got baseball around the corner, we've got tournament play around the corner, and I'm telling you, our timing on starting this couldn't be better because there's going to be so much to talk about in the coming weeks, and I just literally get up every day, and I can't wait to get to whatever it is we're going to talk about next. And that's what's going to be talked about next. Baseball and some basketball. We'll have some big games to talk about on Tuesday and Wednesday night that shape how this thing plays out. And it's been fun doing with you today. Any thoughts that we didn't get to today that you want to close with?
No, I think we, like you said, we said it, and just knowing that baseball season's about to start, we've got the SEC tournament, the NCAA tournament coming up in basketball. Man, these this next month and a half or so is just is going to be wild, but it is one of the most exciting times of the year for sure when you think about all the things that are going on. So yeah, we'll have all that covered, like you said, right here on the podcast. Again, you can find it anywhere now: Apple Podcast, Spotify. If you're using a third-party app, it should make its way there. Maybe already on there, but if not, you can search wherever you listen to your podcast for either the 14 or Southeastern 14. You should be able to find it either way. And Chris, as we've teased before too, we've got a website coming at some point, and that's just going to add another layer to the coverage that we're going to have. So just lots of exciting stuff that we're working on right now.
Well, and tell people where to access our podcast, where to get our Twitter feed. By the way, please follow us on Twitter. Let's build that following up a little bit. My goodness, our listening audience really came through on Apple Podcasts. We got a ton of great ratings. If you would continue to do that for us, please, that helps us get noticed so more people can find us, helps us build sponsorships into things that we need to do to grow and sustain this program. And I know if you're not an Apple guy, we've got podcasts other place. But Blake, I'm going to give it to you to tell people where to find us on Twitter and certain destinations. And again, website coming very soon. I think we'll have an announcement on that this week. But anyway, I'll let you close and give the folks all those things.
Yep, like you said, on Twitter, we're at 14 Southeastern, which you can find on there. And yeah, our podcast audience has grown pretty quickly, and you said it. I think a lot of thanks to that goes to everyone leaving the nice 5-star ratings and reviews. That really does help us reach more people, and so our audience already growing pretty quickly. So we appreciate all that, and yeah, just be sure to check everything out we have going on. We got a YouTube channel now. You can find us on there too. We'll put the links to that. Also, probably on Twitter somewhere. We've already put it on there, and we'll have everything on the website once it's up as well.
He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to this episode of the 14. And again, look for another one coming your way on Tuesday.